So I'm going to try and so whenever I think about these specific types of problems, I always look to see what type of trig value I'm kind of working with. So I also try to recall some of the trig limits, the special ones that we talked about in class. So the limit as x goes to 0 for sine of x over x is going to give us 1. And then the other one is going to be the limit as x goes to 0 for cosine of x minus 1 over x, which is going to ultimately give you 0. Now, there is another version of this, the 1 minus cosine of x over x as the limit as x goes to 0. Right, these two are exactly the same because if you actually take out a negative 1 times 0 is still going to ultimately give us 0. So those are kind of the same types of things. So whenever I try to begin with this problem, I always try to have this in mind, that I'm trying to get to one of these three forms. So I'm going to start off by saying sine of pi over 6 plus delta pi and break that up into the adding and subtracting of angles when I'm dealing with trig functions. So this is that whole sine, cosine, cosine, sine one. So I'm going to write this as sine of pi over 6. So sine, cosine, let me write that better, cosine, cosine, sine. So I'm going to write delta x here plus pi over 6 delta x minus 1/2 all over delta x. Okay, so then I'm going to evaluate those. I'm going to evaluate the values. So sine of pi over 6 is going to give us 1/2. So I'm left with 1/2 cosine of delta x plus, this is going to give me root 3 over 2 sine of delta x minus 1/2. And then this is all over delta x. Now the thing to keep in mind here is that each one of these terms, this one, and this one, they all need to be divided by delta x. But if I want to group two of them together, then they can be just under a single delta x. So looking back at my trig properties or trig theorems that we talked about in class, I'm trying to get, let's say, sine of x over x, or in this case, sine of delta x over delta x. And since we're talking about the limit as delta x goes to 0, it's kind of in that same setup. So I have one of those. It's kind of set up just like that. Now, the root 3 over 2 is a constant. I can always put that in front, so that's not going to get in the way. So the remaining value is going to be that 1/2 cosine of delta x, and then a subtraction of 1/2. Well, I can see since the 1/2 is a constant out in front of the cosine of delta x, if I take out that 1/2, and I take it out from here as well, it's leaving me with a minus 1. So I'm going to rewrite this as the following. So I want to say the limit as delta x goes to 0 of root 3 over 2 sine of x, or not sine of x, sine of delta x over delta x. Right, this ultimately is going to give me 1. And then plus the limit as delta x goes to 0. And I'm going to write this as 1/2 cosine of delta x minus 1/2 over delta x, right? Because like I said before, the delta x needs to be dividing each one of those terms. And if I put those together, then I can have a single delta x. So this is almost kind of set up the way that I wanted to. So this is going to be root 3 over 2 times 1. And if there's a constant, right, I don't need to worry about the limit tying with that. So I'm only really concerned with what value is going to be from sine of delta x over delta x. Plus, and then if I still write my limit as delta x goes to 0, I'm going to take out a 1/2, and I'm left with a cosine of delta x minus 1 over, my parentheses are kind of screwed up, over delta x, right? This ultimately is going to give me 0 here with a 1/2 here, right? I still have the root 3 over 2 times 1, and my answer is going to be root 3 over 2.